folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. Tonight, we continue our Concerns series with a very interesting one, I think, which is the Ravens' depth by position group expressed as where they can best tolerate an injury to occur to the major position groups. Joining me to discuss that topic is Sean Asher. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ken. It's always good to sit and talk Baltimore Ravens football with your brother.
It's a great opportunity. We've had a lot of fun recently doing a number of pods, Sean, and I appreciate you being such a good supporter of the show. But tell us a little bit about how you went about this and maybe why you picked this as a concern.
So for me, my mind, I'm not an X's and O's guy, and I can keep up, but it's not my forte. And grading an offensive tackle's ability to move their hands or their feet at a high level, my eyes just aren't that great. So I can keep up with those conversations, but my mind is always kind of on roster construction and who the next man up is and where development is, and that's kind of always the way I look at entering the season, because I think overall the Ravens do a pretty good job of building a playoff worthy roster when the season starts, but then most of the time what happens is injuries, and that's the biggest reason why I think we don't make it a lot of the years to that hold the Lombardi every year is most years it's injury related.
Yeah, obviously the Ravens have had some big problems with Lamar being injured in recent years, with injuries at left tackle, holding them back some over the last 5 years or so. But they have generally had a playoff caliber roster otherwise. So we're going to look at each position group as we go through this, and try and talk about from most insulated to least insulated, which position groups are in the best shape to handle an injury were one to occur.
Yeah, very excited about this, man. I feel like we're probably going to go over on time just because how intertwined everything is, but I'm excited for this.
We'll see how that needs to happen, but you go ahead and start us off with the top of your list. And we did 11 position groups in doing this, and I always don't want to read you the position groups because I might read them in the order that I have them here, but we did 11 position groups. We split the interior offensive line away from offensive tackle.
Yep.
Did not include special teams in this because special teams, any team really has to go to the street for if they have an injury. So take us through what's the position where the Ravens are the most insulated.
To me, it's corner. That's where we are most insulated starting the season, and part of that is Kyle Hamilton going to play corner? Is he going to play slot? Even if he doesn't, in my mind, it's still the most insulated position group. You've got Wiggins, Marlowe, Stevens. All three of them are starter quality outside corners. You've got TJ Tampa, who I was like you, and I think in one of the videos that the Ravens released, Eric DaCosta wanted to take him in the first pick of the fourth, or he was like wanted them in the third or something, and I was like, yeah, I wanted them there too. But TJ Tampa's pretty promising. You've got Mollett, and then you've also got Pepe and JAD. So I mean, you've got people that are good corners, and then you've got some depth, and you also have some bodies that aren't. I can't remember what year it was, but there was one year, maybe like 2017 or 18, we were just signing dudes off the street.
Unfortunately, it's happened more times than I care to even think about, but 2005, 2007 were terrible years for injuries at corner. And it's one of those positions you just can't really fix it on the fly. And it's one where the replacement level seriously degrades as the season goes on. Left tackle, cornerback, you're not going to find a guy who can really help you if you have to find one in week 6 or week 8 or God forgive you, forbid week 16. You need a cornerback and you're out in December looking for a whatever is left over in terms of quality, because there isn't going to be anything there. But I had them at the second most insulated positions. I've got one ahead of it. I'm guessing we probably flip-flopped on the top two. I'm very bullish on the addition of Wiggins and Tampa. I think they can both be contributors this year, potentially, and that's big. I think The top four on the outside, there's probably no other team in the NFL that's any better off than the Ravens are. I think in terms of their outside corner stuff, I don't know if JAD is going to make the team or not. I mean, he's in jeopardy of not, and he might be somebody that the Ravens could trade for either a seventh or conditional seventh or something at the end of camp. I think his time with the Ravens is probably coming to an end here. They have a couple of different slot corners now. Darius Washington, you didn't mention him, but he won the slot job. Of course, he's been playing some safety, as we have heard. Ryan Mink wrote a big article about him, praising his safety play. Something tells me, and I really appreciate Ryan's effort, but something tells me that Darius Washington is probably ticketed for the slot corner role again this year, and not necessarily. Whether he's a backup to Millette or the primary, I think either is possible. But that's a ton of depth, and to me it was the second most insulated position, and I think it's also the position where injuries are the most certain to occur. Yep. So there will be players who miss time out of the group. I think the Ravens are as well situated as anybody to do it. I had that rated on our 1 to 5 scale. I had that cornerback a 4 for us.
To me, that's a 5. I mean, it's, and you're right. I left Darius Washington off because, I've got a safety ranking somewhere in there. Right. And I've got and in my mind, that's a thing. I can't imagine that Marlowe is going to be on punt returns anymore. So I'm thinking, maybe there's a little bit less risk of injury. But it's just, I've looked at the years and so many obscure guys that we just signed off the street late in the season. And I just don't see the need for that this year. And then I'm also looking at the previous years where if somebody goes down, we're counting on Anthony Averett, or if somebody goes down, we're counting on Shockey Brown. And we're not looking at that right now. So, the top line starters are really good, and the first layer of depth is pretty solid. And then if you're talking about JAD, I mean, he's a 5th round pick. If that's the dude that doesn't make the squad, that's a pretty deep squad.
Yeah, he's in his 3rd year, and he's yep. hardly played at all. So there are some other asterisks on JAD at this point. But one of the things that could actually reduce corner depth, and I'm not sure, it could be Washington that ends up being a guy who just seamlessly moves back to safety. In which case, it's not really a huge loss in terms of their other players who could be in that position. They could re-sign Worley, and they could have more depth. They could move Humphrey to safety. Still hasn't been discussed really among Ravens fans much, but I think it makes a whole lot of sense for Marlon Humphrey, with all his experience and all his great off-ball play he's done in his career, that he'd make a really good safety. He's a physical guy, and I think it could make a lot of sense for him to be on the back end, splitting the field on some plays and also on the outside on others. And a player like Marlowe, I'm not at all concerned about him learning those positions and it messing up his development somehow. Marlowe is who he is as a player at this point. Yeah. And he may or may not still be good enough to handle corner. And we're going to find that out, I think, this year. The other thing that let's react to that first, because
I am on the train of thought and hope that Marlowe is our nickel. That's where I'm at. Okay. Just going back and looking at the season from last year and watching some games from last year as we're talking about all these other episodes. That San Francisco game where he's lined up in the slot, that was nasty. And then you flash back to the year 2016, 17, whichever year he had all the fumbles, he was in a slot a lot that year. So I don't know. It just, to me, it's hard not to put Wiggins out there. It's really hard not to do that. Yeah. So I'm on the train that hopefully Marlowe is playing in the slot, but I do agree that long term, it behooves Marlon to start looking at safety sooner rather than later to extend his playing career. And to your point, he is a very cerebral player. He's not Marcus Peters cerebral, but he's very technically cerebral. He sees the mistakes and points them out and emotes, and he he catches his technical mistakes very quickly and tries to fix those deficiencies. So, yeah, I think long-term safety is a really good play for him.
So the second point I wanted to make, and I agree with all that you said, by the way, the second point I wanted to make with regard to this is the Ravens really do need to get Wiggins and Tampa, I would say, on the field for something. Now, Wiggins, I want to see, him play 300 to 400 snaps at a minimum. At a minimum, we got to find out who he is. He's a first-round draft pick, but Tampa, I think there's also a reason to get him on the field for 100 snaps at a minimum. Wiggins, you can accomplish strictly with rotational play. I mean, Humphrey probably can stand to have some snaps off at this point in his career. He's at the Jimmy Smith kind of point in his career, though he's a little bit younger at that same point. You want to see him splitting time. Brandon Stevens, they're not going to move him off corner in a contract year. That would be really a nasty trick to play on him, frankly, to do that. So you got three guys who can rotate there. Tampa, you got to figure out how to get him in, whether it's you're winning by a blowout. He unfortunately has to get a trial by fire due to injury. That's always a possibility. You might rotate him in a game where only two of your other three guys are healthy. So you have a few different ways you can get him in the game, but he needs to play on defense. And the reason is that Stevens is at a crossroads right now. He's probably not going to be a Raven next year. And so the Ravens need to figure out how they're going to replace him. And Marlon also might not be a Raven next year. He's in a crossroads season where it could make sense to cut him. And if that's the case, then they need to know how they're moving on from this. They really did masterful job of finding two guys near the top of the board in terms of the draft that make a lot of sense for long term. But they need to play them this year in order to decide if they can make the chess moves next year on both Humphrey and Stevens.
I imagine Ravens are very hopeful that Stevens nets us a third-round comp pick next year. So I see no reason that they're going to do any sort of debauchery or tomfoolery to try to mess with that equation, because it doesn't even benefit them, long term to put anybody in over Stevens just because they might long term, it still benefits them to have Stevens on the field and get you that third round comp pick. But, I think there's probably a good chance that, Stevens or Marlon or whoever is dealing with, a hammy or a thigh bruise or something where, if we're talking about playing against the Steelers, it's all hands on deck. But if you're talking about playing, a team that's, 2-8 at the midseason, and somebody's still got something that's nagging, and then the week after that's a big game, then I can imagine you're putting TJ Tampa in for a full game and seeing what happens. I imagine that's probably pretty appealing. So yeah. I think you're right, and I think it probably does happen.
All right. I can't the one circumstance where I could see Stevens getting moved this year, and I really almost think it's unlikely anyway if he does not play well at right corner for a stretch of games, and the team is still desperate to find that back end split field safety. I guess I could see it, but boy, it's not going to result in a happy player, and I don't think the result is going to end up being good. I don't think there's any risk to Marlon Humphrey's long-term value being decreased by him playing some snaps at safety and some snaps at corner. But I do think that it's a big risk for Stevens. Stevens needs to get paid this next year, and this is the contract, that he's going to get in his NFL career.
I agree with that logic. I think worst case scenario, you bounce Marlon around a little bit, then maybe he's looking at $10 million total in his next contract that he misses out because he didn't have that opportunity, whereas Stevens, that can carry over through his entire career into a lot more than that. So
it could even benefit Marlon if he proves he can play safety,
exactly.
And play the back end. I mean, you could be looking at a career extension and a $10 million a year contract the next time around, which I don't think would be in the cards for him as a cornerback at this point if he were to hit the street.
Yeah, probably not. Unless he has another all-pro year of forcing fumbles, unless he pulls another one of those out of his bag. But yeah, probably not.
Could be. So let me go back and I'll do my top position where I think the Ravens are most insulated, and that's at tight end. Obviously, the Ravens have four guys at tight end. I'm guessing it's your number two position based on your things, but they have four guys at tight end if you include Patrick Ricard. And I'm already shaking my head trying to figure out how they're going to assign snaps. You've got Ricard, Kolar, who both are pretty reasonable inline blockers or options. Is that Kolar certainly needs to get a little better there, but Ricard is at the at the top of the league in terms of whether you want him at fullback or tight end as a blocker. Ricard's not going to give you anything in the receiving game. Kolar might. They had tremendous success throwing to the tight ends this last year with a passer rating over 140 and 12 touchdowns, no interceptions. So they're going to want to get those guys on the field. And yet when I look at getting Likely and Andrews snaps and those guys competing, there is an awful lot of mouths to feed. And I think it would be really, it's going to be already very difficult for all of the skill position players to be happy with their 2024 snap counts for the Ravens. And it's most acute at tight end. It's most significant there.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of Twitter fodder about Bateman's targets and Bateman's productivity, but like we're forgetting all about Isaiah Likely, and like there's gotta be a correlation between those two, and like it just, there's only so many mouths to feed. And if Mark Andrews is the starter and we're running more 11 personnel, then it's almost a travesty, because the same way we're talking about Stevens and netting a comp pick, like Isaiah Likely in the right offense where he is the number one and he's not ahead of the first or second best tight end, depending on how much you want to argue about it. If he's not behind Mark Andrews, he's a top 5 tight end in this NFL. Just athletically, skill wise, like he just is that good. So, I agree. The tight end was my second group and number 5 rating as well.
Okay. All right. Let's go move on to your number 3, because I think we're dragging it a little bit.
Wide receiver, which is kind of an interesting hot take, I guess. It depends on how you look at it. So Zay Flowers, Bateman, Aguilar, Hardy, Walker, and Wallace. And then after that, you've got my guy, Sean Wade, Malik Cunningham, Ishmael, Sean Ryan. For me, like, that's a pretty solid group. That's a pretty solid depth. Not one of them, like Zay's your best overall. Bateman's got a lot of skills, a lot of talent, but if you start losing some of these guys, you still got guys that can produce. And I think Aguilar showed us some things last year that earned him another contract, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. So 45 targets for Aguilar last year. It's going to be hard for him to get that sort of a targeting this year without injury occurring. But on the other hand, how do you not throw him the football? He's a good extended play target. He knows he's very savvy on the field in terms of how he's impacting the safety. We saw that obviously in the Rams game in a big way. And then you got a rookie who may or may not adapt quickly to the NFL. And it can be a case of he might get injuries with Tez Walker. They want to get him on the field, I'm sure, but it's going to be hard to do it. If you're playing a lot of 12 personnel, you only get 2 wide receivers per play. That really cuts into total wide receiver snaps. And I think, everyone may have to take less in the absence of injuries. The nice part about the wide receiver group is they have multiple deep threats. The not so nice thing is that they don't really have a replacement for the X receiver. So in my opinion, I don't think you can put Aguilar there, and I don't think you can put Tez Walker there to play the X if something were to happen to Bateman. Bateman is the route runner they really need to have on that side. Lamar needs to take advantage of it, and they need to build that into the offense more than they have to date, because Bateman has really been underutilized and undertrusted so far in his career. But hopefully that improves this year, and hopefully Bateman does everything he possibly can to work with Lamar Jackson whenever he gets time, and that should, I think, improve as a function of that. But if also another thing about the wide receiver group is if your wide receivers have an injury, one of the natural evolutions of the offense would be to just go to more 12.
Exactly. Yep, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I could see a lot more 12 personnel as if we lost Zay or Bateman. And then outside of that, it's like, I don't know that Aguilar, Hardy, Walker, Wallace, any one of those goes down, that it really is going to be a huge deal breaker for us. So part of my ranking of the wide receiver group so high is because of the offensive flexibility that having Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar, who we still haven't really even seen be able to like crack the lineup and see what he can do. So there's a lot there.
All right. So I had the wide receiver group as my fifth most insulated. So we both had cornerback, tight end 1, 2. You had wide receiver 3. My my third group is the outside linebackers. All right. So this is a kind of difficult group to determine. Obviously, they have one guy they absolutely cannot lose, and that's Owe. After that, I think Van Noy, while good, is replaceable. You go to the street and you get an unemployed, aging outside linebacker who can rush the passer. I think those guys are available. I think they might also have to do that if Ajabo doesn't really have anything in the tank when they look at him in the preseason, when they get into the regular season. Ajabo's job is not 100% safe at this point, in my opinion. So we'll see how that plays out. I certainly hope he becomes the player he was at Michigan again, the player that they had all the hope for. But in just practical sense, his ceiling and his floor are both lower than they were when the Ravens drafted him.
Yep, I agree. So for me, wide receiver, OLB, and one other position were all ranked 4.
Every year, data breaches are on the rise. In 2022, the number of victims shot up nearly 41.5% from the previous year. And your personal information is at risk. With hundreds of commercial databases ready to be hacked, and that number of victims, it keeps going up each year. Plus, the U.S. has another big data privacy problem, the people search sites. You guys have all seen these. These are websites that create detailed personal profiles on millions of Americans and then publish them online for anyone to see. Your address, your phone number, even family details are just a click away. But there's a way to protect yourself. Meet Incogni. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests the removal of your personal data, and handles any objections they may have. This means less stress for you and more peace of mind. With Incogni, you can safeguard your information from cyber criminals who steal social security numbers and other sensitive personal data to commit identity theft. Imagine the relief of knowing that your personal data is no longer easy prey for hackers. Incogni also protects you from data brokers selling your information to companies to target vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, exposing you to even more discrimination. These lists with titles like Tough Start, Young Single Parents, Rural, and Barely Making It can harm you both online and offline. Don't let your personal data fall into the wrong hands. Take control with Incogni today. Visit incogni.com/filmstudy and safeguard your privacy now. It's time to reclaim your digital security. That's Incogni/filmstudy. INCOGNI.com/filmstudy. Incogni, your shield in a digital world.
So we're still on the same track here, but I think I hold a little bit more weight to a loss of Van Noy, but still not a ton. I agree that we could afford to lose him. I think you're right. Owe is the biggest piece of that puzzle that we can't afford to lose.
And the other thing that's happening in that group is that you already have 6 total guys.
Correct.
Okay, 6 bodies are going to make it. That we presume are going to make it. Tavius Robinson and Malik Harrison. Malik Harrison has kind of an asterisk next to his name because he might be Roquan's backup, at least on a short-term basis. But he's an outside linebacker they use on early downs to try and keep the others well rested. I think his job is honestly completely safe given the increased special teams role, so he's not going anywhere. Tavius Robinson is a second-year player. He's not going anywhere. He'll be a Raven. Adisa Isaac, they just drafted. There's no way he's going anywhere. And Van Noy, I think they've got guaranteed money in his contract, but it wouldn't matter. They need him. At least they believe they need him to start the season. Obviously, Owe is not going anywhere. So you're down to the only guy they might cut is Ajabo. But if they didn't cut Ajabo, you've got 6 players then on the Ravens, and they're going to be fighting for game day activations.
Yep.
It would not even surprise me if there's a minor injury that they already set one of these guys up and in particular, if it were Robinson or Ajabo probably, or Isaac, to return at midseason. Have him be on IR to start the season, and then have him be one of those two spots. The Ravens always knew how to make more of those spots, but that'd be one of the two spots that how the league is mandated that can return.
Of course. And I agree. That's why they're in this ranking for me, just because the number of bodies that you have, and not one of them is just a guy. Not one of them is a guy that just you have to have 6 of them, and that's why you have 6 of them. Every one of them can contribute to the Baltimore Ravens in this season. So, yeah, I mean, it's a very deep, well-rounded group.
All right, so OLB was actually a 3 for me and not a 4. I had tight end 5, cornerback 4, and OLB 3. What other group did you have as a 4? Let's move to that.
Offensive tackle. Yep.
Okay.
So it's tricky between a 3 and a 4 for me. I'm not sold on the starting rotation. I'm not sold that Rosengarten and Ronnie Stanley are the answer, and that's going to be great for us this coming season. But that being said, similarly to the OLB group, we've got bodies. Like, you've got Pat McCary, you've got Falele, who you're hoping has taken another step in having some aggression and dominance that matches the massive frame that he carries. And then we also have Jones, who, I know it hasn't worked out for him in other places, but, the Ravens have a way of kind of taking some guys and making some things work at offensive line. So just because the options at depth, and we're talking mainly about what happens if players get injury, I feel pretty good about it, considering, what other teams have at backup tackle,
Yeah, that's a great point, and you did a great job of describing the 5 there and how it might work out or might not. They're highly incented to find out what they have with Rosengarten, because he might have to be their plan for 2025 at left tackle. So I think it's almost a better position that they're going to force some rookie play into there at some point. Rosengarten will not sit on the bench the whole year unless something is drastically wrong. And if he does, it's not a matter of, well, we just don't know how good he is. No, it's really a problem, because the Ravens coaches don't think he's good enough for them to find out if they have a potential answer for the 2025 left tackle situation. If he were to somehow sit for the entire year, that would be an absolute disaster for the pick in the second round this year. So I think he certainly will get playing time at some point. He may start right away there. Because honestly, I don't see why Falele or Jones would start ahead of him there. And I think Jones is also a swingman, a backup at both guard positions as well. The guard set is fairly not deep. Obviously, neither of us has mentioned it so far, so he may have to be relied on there. I will say this. I don't think Patrick McCary is part of replacement plans at any other position. I think he's purely a backup tackle at this point. So we've talked about McCary's versatility. He can play anywhere, blah, 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 blah. He's got to play tackle for the Ravens. He's too valuable as a backup tackle to risk him to injury at another position.
Which is so fair and so true. I don't remember if it was McCary. It was Phillips. The year that we had Villan. Yep, you're right. So you're probably right about that. He probably is. He really can't go in at guard. It's not safe. It's not wise. But
or center for that matter, where the Ravens don't really have a backup. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just agree on all of that. I think my next group is going to be defensive line, which is tied with another group as well. Pierce, Madubuike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington, and Urban. You've got 5 to make 3. They all played all the snaps last year, healthy, good to go. Everybody's a year older. We'll see what it does. If you lose one, it hurts your rotation. They've got 2 guys that they signed recently, Deidrin Sanat and Josh Tupou, journeymen, and they'll come in, they'll be on, if they're not on somebody else's roster, I'm sure they're going to make the practice squad. And then if somebody gets hurt, they're the next ones up. But I feel pretty good about that. You also got Rashad Nichols. I think
Uh-huh.
we were trying to squeeze in at guard at some point in time for numbers or something. Was that him?
No, that was another guy. Oh damn it! Yeah. Now you're gonna drive me nuts the rest of the
I'm
show
so
because I'm gonna try to think of the guard here.
sorry.
Yeah, that's a guy who played a tiny little bit of guard in Seattle, and the Ravens wanted to call him a guard, so he'd be the 8th offensive lineman, so they get an extra free activation when they thought they really only need 7. But his only play came on the defensive side of the ball.
Yep.
Yeah, it was very Ravens-esque roster management, by the way.
So smart. It's like, okay, hold on. We just got to call him a guard. Sure, done. Easy enough.
Yeah.
Whatever.
In fact, everyone on the roster is a guard because
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so not an incredibly deep group, but you have 5 to make 3. That worked out really well last year. If you lose any single one of them, it hurts your rotation, but it doesn't. I don't think it makes a huge difference in our playoff chances or anything like that. Matabike would really hurt for sure. But if you lose Matabike and you're stuck lining up Michael Pierce and Travis Jones next to each other, are you really that bad off? So that's why they're my next group up.
I could be excited about that. Now I had the DL as a 2 here, and they are on my list, they're the 4th most vulnerable to injuries, and I got a couple reasons for that. The first is that the 6th man drop off is very significant down to Rashad Nichols. That would be true for a lot of teams. So some teams actually carry 6 defensive linemen also, so they play more base defense and they want to do that. Ravens play primarily nickel, and when they do, they don't have a need for a 3rd defensive lineman on the field on a given play. The other is because the position is rotational in nature, you've got to think about how much am I going to be taxed relative to my normal way of rotating if I lose one of my guys who's actually eating a significant number of snaps, whether that be Pierce, any of Pierce Jones or Matabike would be extremely bad, obviously. Broderick Walsh did not play that well this last year. But hopefully he's going to be better again. Brent Urban is playing the fewest snaps of anybody, probably is the most replaceable of their 5 defensive linemen in terms of what he brings to the team. But he does do some things for them that are special in their own right. The problem for the Ravens, if they were to lose a defensive lineman from the interior and from that 3 to make 2 pass rush group, which is it is a embarrassment of riches what the Ravens have on the inside. Have 3 guys who can rush the passer and not know which of their nose tackles they want to have on the field on passing downs, but know that they want it to be one of them, along with Matabike. So if they lost one, maybe it's not the end of the world. You alluded to that, that they would still have 2 good pass rushers. But one of the ways they could become very heavily taxed is that their outside linebacker group has to kick into more rush nickel formations, meaning that they have 3 outside linebackers on the field on passing downs, or even 4 in race car that we have seen in the past, certainly. But I think this group, it would be a very nuclear situation for the defensive line to have had the set of injuries that forced that to occur.
Yep. So the other reason they were ranked higher for me, that season that we signed Justin Ellis and Domata Pekka after week 4. No, it wasn't in anybody's training camp. It was just available. And it's like, we can find bodies at defensive line. We're not talking about trying to get somebody to play island man corner. It's our depth right now is good. And then if we have to go to the street, it's not the end of the world from what I've seen so far.
And you can, that same year they found the cornerback they needed for the ice cream cone dropper.
Yeah.
It's one of the great stories of all time. I just can't get over it. I love that DeCosta makes it a big secret about the player, and then we traded somebody to the Rams, and got the cornerback we really needed.
Right, dude. And I've had to let people go before, and I just, as Eric DeCosta is telling the story, I literally just can't imagine this, like any person I've ever had to let go throwing an ice cream cone and just landing on my office floor. I just can't imagine that.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah.
It certainly is tough. My number 4 group is still unmentioned yet. Can I do that?
Yeah, go for it.
The
Yeah.
top 4 have been mentioned, right?
Yep.
So my 4th most insulated group for me is running back. Now I know not everybody's going to say that. Not everybody's going to agree with this, and they're going to talk about running back depth being pretty significant. We'll see in how good Derrick Henry is, but the Ravens have found capable stylistic fits on the scrap heap for a lot of other teams out of the undrafted pile in terms of Gus Edwards. They've just done a very good job in general with that. And when they've not done a good job, it's when they get the kind of player that Derrick Henry is. They go for an older back and it doesn't work out. And we've seen, Freeman and Murray and Bell and who's the guy who wore number 15 last year briefly. And I can't even believe he was still on the team.
Gordon.
Kenyon Drake.
Kenyon Drake. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the one that's still tweeting about all his success.
But I didn't know that. That's funny. I'll have to look for that.
Dude, he riles Ravens fans all the time. It's great. Yeah.
But anyway, they found a bunch of guys who can help them in various ways, and it's generally been when they've gone with the older back. That's generally been when it's not worked out. If Henry has a good year, I'm sure it's really going to work out. Everybody's going to be happy with it. I just want you to say, don't start making excuses for the fact that Henry was injured when it happens, because it is likely to happen. He's, now a 30-year-old running back. That's when injuries start to pile up. And I think you have to make the case that he's the Nolan Ryan of running backs. And Nolan Ryan, of course, just for people who follow football and other sports, but not baseball, maybe Nolan Ryan could still throw very close to 100 miles an hour when he was in his early 40s. And that just doesn't happen. And, through 7 no-hitters, was around for forever in the league. I think he might have pitched for 26 or 27 years in total. But if Derrick Henry is that, well, then that could be the guy who led the league in carries in 4 of the last 5 seasons. He could do it again for the Ravens. We could see the gravitational pull. It could be everything that fans hope for. The Ravens are buying a lottery ticket on that outcome. My actual guess as to what Henry provides is a relatively limited number of carries, down significantly from his tread where he's had previously, to the 230 to 250 carry range, down from 300 or so in several of the last few years. So I think also a drop off in play would be likely, but that's true of any position. If you lose a key player, you have a drop off in play. The Ravens just proved extremely effective with young backs, and they could have Ali and Hill taking more significant roles. Hill did well in a significant role last year. They could have Mitchell potentially returning for the second half of the season, icing on the cake if it happens. I don't demand it. I think they could go find another back to be the guy, particularly at the end of training camp. I'd love to see them try to pick somebody up like this. And I just think the position has more significant options for recovering from a serious injury to Henry than some of the other positions we're talking about.
Man, before I give you my ranking on running back and dive into that, just flashback. Nolan Ryan started in 66, finished in 93.
Mm-hmm.
Do you even remember anybody like the term Tommy Johns in 93? Like, this was pre-medical advancements that he did that for that long.
Tommy John got his Tommy John surgery in the late 70s. So
late 70s. Okay. Yeah. So it was a thing. All right. Interesting. Sorry. Running back for me was second worst. And I mean, what you're saying makes total sense. But then I went and looked at the guys that are available on the street right now: Dalvin Cook, Latavius Murray, Melvin Gordon.
Those aren't the guys we want. I mean, the guys we want
if
are the
Henry
guys who
goes down, I'm like, I don't know that we really do have that option. But what you're saying makes sense, because the years we couldn't replace the young speed were the years that COVID was messing with the draft and the UDFA pool. So we do have Rasheen Ali. We do have
Justice Hill.
Thank you. And so, like, on that side, we're good. I am trying to be optimistic and not count for Keaton Mitchell for anything for this year, because I just don't. The kid's story, how just electric it was, how impressive the stats were, all of that. I want to like not have any expectations this year, and then following year be like, okay, let's try to do 90% of that. Let's try to get that mark. So
I think the player they'd be looking for, I certainly freaking hope they're not looking for a Melvin Gordon or anybody like that off the street. The guy that I want them to try and get to try and retain is maybe the small school running back that they UDFA'd will be on the practice squad, or an Owen Wright from last year who did a little bit in the preseason, could be a guy they turn to. And I think, what has been very obvious from the Ravens statistics is that it's Lamar Jackson who really drives the running game. And it doesn't matter all that much who you have otherwise, as long as they can execute the mesh point effectively. So you can't have people who are constantly fumbling the mesh point or people that want to grab the ball away from Lamar. They got to be willing to let Lamar pull the ball, and then you have a running game that's very effective. And the success rate of the individual runs by the Ravens are at the top of league history. They're one of the only teams that runs regularly with positive plays in the entire league, and runs with a positive EPA for that matter. Most other teams, because a lot of their running comes to close out games, and a lot of the Ravens runnings come to close out games, their running is greatly reduced on an EPA basis because you naturally giving up expected points to get expected wins in the second half of a football game when you try and run that clock out. So anyway, I'm not at all concerned about what 28 to 30-year-old veteran running backs are out there. The guy I want is the guy the Ravens know from a little bit of their own scouting and is now 22 or 23 years old and is either an R or 1 player that the other team that has him hasn't figured out how good he is yet.
It makes total sense what you're saying. I was looking at it and I'm thinking, man, if Derrick Henry goes down, I don't want any of those guys. I don't want Dalvin Cook. I don't want Latavius Murray. I don't want Melvin Gordon. We've tried all of them. Pass. So, I mean, it makes sense what you're saying, though. It makes total sense.
I hope you're right on that. And I think that part of the reason that they've gotten some of these players is that they've ended up with some of these players is that they thought that as veterans, they had experience with executing mesh concepts, and they didn't want to take a chance on a younger player bringing them in and doing that. And that overvalued, something that was necessary but not sufficient about them as runners, and made them less of stylistic fits, because they're really older running backs. They're generally speaking not worth taking a chance on. Yep. And Henry is the difference, because he's been at the top of the league for a long time, and even the great Derrick Henry has shown signs of decline over the last several years that are there. He's still leading the league in carries, but he showed signs of decline. And I think it's only fair Ravens fans kind of realize that as we go into this season. So it's.
I also think it was indicative of the contract he signed. It seemed like he understood it, because what he came to Baltimore to play for, I think he understood that he's later in his career, and, there's a tendency to decline. And, I know he said to Jerry Coleman, like, wait and see, or whatever it is, but I think he's realistic that, like, Father Time is a thing, to some degree at least, because he's not holding out to set the market, even though he could. I don't know that he'd get it, but he could, So
he could have tried to get more. Sean, I appreciate it. We have to cut off the first half of the show right now, and we'll come back and do part 2 in a moment. But tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I'm on Twitter, and I kept it up this time, but I don't know how to find Twitter. Damn.
_Sky_high is his.
That's it. Thank you, Ken.
But he's a great he's not just a great Twitter follow. He's a great engager if you want to talk football with him. So DM him. DMs are open, right, Sean?
DMs are open. DMs are open for sure.
So he's definitely somebody. If you want to get involved in a conversation, go ahead and tag him, and you'll get some very good thoughts. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. We're looking to do a couple of more episodes of the Concerns series. We've had 5 or 6 of them recorded already. Would really appreciate it if you want to be part of that. DM me and I will get back to you very quickly and come up with a time that we can record and make sure we're not overlapping too much with the other shows, although obviously there's some overlap in a lot of this. Sean, really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. Always, buddy. Always good to talk to you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.